what would you say to revenue leaders out there to encourage them to develop this literacy or at least to dive into the data? Like what would you say to them?
Yeah, you're infinitely unscalable. I use data as a way to keep me honest and to keep me on track. When it comes down to whether I'm going to get a deal or not, my gut sings to me at those moments. But I can be much more scalable and effective when I know where to focus those moments.
As businesses continue to navigate the changing landscape of sales and revenue generation, CROs are leading the charge. But being a successful CRO isn't just about setting goals for the sales team and driving revenue. You must have the right data and processes in place so that your sellers can collaborate and run revenue. But you can't implement it alone. That's where your revenue operations team comes in. They're responsible for everything from data analysis and reporting to process improvement and technology implementation. By partnering closely with RevOps, a CRO can gain better understanding of what's happening within the business, identify areas for improvement, and make data-driven decisions. But it's not just about getting your revenue teams to work together. CROs need to be accurate and effective leaders. That means being transparent, communicating clearly, and leading by example. By working with revenue operations, CROs can build a culture of trust and collaboration that drives success. In this episode, Adam Aarons, CRO at Drata, is sharing how he partners with RevOps to get good data to make good decisions.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue with Kyle Coleman.
Adam Aarons, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to take the listeners back in time a little bit and talk about your history as a seller. I think I saw that in your time as a global accounts manager at Agile, you were 700% to quota in a single year. Did I read that right?
It was a big deal. It was a good year. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I'm old now, but yeah, there was a deal that we did at Agile. It was a combination of software and services, and Accenture did the services, but all in it was like $18 million.
Gotta love it. So you go from that and then fast forward a couple years and you become the AVP at Open Pages. You move on to Blade Logic, BMC software, and then ultimately end up at Okta as a CRO. Staying in that kind of late 1990s, early 2000s, talk to us a little bit about what was it like running revenue then, being a revenue leader then? What were some of the obstacles that you were facing?
Yeah, for me, it was like early 2000s, right? In the late 90s and the like 2001 to 2000, I was still slinging software as a rep. And then I moved into a manager's role. And it's gone through different microeconomic climates. And I watched things like the cloud like emerge when people are talking about artificial intelligence today, the way that they talked about the cloud back then. And I used to say the cloud's an interesting term because it's nebulous. It means so many different things to different people. And I think AI takes on a lot of that today and that it's emerging, but it's going to be so powerful and drive so much change in the market. Once it really does get definition and it really does settle itself in like the cloud does today. But just going back to my previous experiences, people want to work with good people, and that hasn't changed. So when you look at like the customers and the prospects and the way that we're working with them and the way that people want to acquire solutions and software being the conduit of that, they want to be able to trust the vendors that they're working with. And so, especially as a leader, you want to be a part of an organization that you can stand behind because those relationships that I built in the early 2000s, I still have a bunch of them. And the folks that I was working with then that were senior VPs are all at the C level now, or senior directors or senior VPs or C level. And it's your reputation. It's who you are. It's not just the solutions that you're selling. It's the people that you're working with and the things that you stand behind as a person. And people buy from people. And I see that. And I believe that.
That word trust is so important. And you know what's interesting, and we're going to juxtapose selling strategies from the 2000s to the selling strategies today. And I know that a lot is the same. But back in the 2000s, trust and relationships were maybe even more important than they are now. How do you feel about that kind of intersection of the relationship building aspect of sales and now that the data aspect of sales and blending it all together?
Yeah, I was always a data connoisseur because I was never great at it. So for me, that's never changed. And it's more now that you get better access to data and you
Mm.
get more data intelligence around the decisions versus just running different Excel models and trying to figure it out on a whiteboard, which is awesome. And that's the premise of tools like Clary that give you better insights and give you the ability to make data driven decisions. Data is a super powerful thing, right? Because good data is really good and it helps you make really good decisions. And bad data is really bad because you can make really bad decision. And so I've always prided myself on like being as transparent as I can, especially with my operations partners and trying to get to the, hey, what is good data? And then how do we make the best decisions based on good data?
I feel like there's a thread to pull on this where I'm curious to hear about a time where you had this really sharp insight, this really good insight from data, and you were able to make a meaningful decision, a meaningful process change, whatever it may be, spanning your whole career. Any particular moment in time really stick out to you where you're like, wow, we just found a huge lever buried in the data, and now we can go and put that into action.
I find them often. So I can even cite like when we do annual plans and you do a 12-month look back and then you look forward 18 months backward, if you can see that far. You look at data and you try to make the best decisions for the organization because as a revenue leader, we're responsible for the success or failure of the quota that we're going to set for the organization. And that's all built on data. And it's looking at, hey, what was our average deal size? What was our average time to close a deal from early stage pipeline, from late stage pipeline? What do those conversion rates look like? And by industry, by segment, right? And you'll see a lot of noise. And then all of a sudden you see signals in the noise and you go, wait a minute, there's something right there. And like you said, you pull on a thread and you can go deeper and you can then really start to understand, hey, maybe there's optimization and we can build more effectivity into the way that we're doing things. And we do that. Like we resegmented this year, we were looking at what are our average deal sizes by segment? How can we drive more productivity across the team if we segment it differently? And in order to do that, you have to look at different sample sizes of data. And then you slice it again, you slice it a third time, and then you cohort it. And you go, wow, there's signals in the noise. And you can drive through that and say, hey, if we make a shift up or a shift down, we can really have an effect on the average deal size, which can really have an effect on how long it takes us to close a deal, on what our productivity rates look like to close those deals, and backing all that into the first touch with a prospect and how we're going to be able to go then build out a quota based on that meets us the most effective and frankly to grow as fast as we possibly can in the most responsible way possible.
It's so interesting because you said you've always had this predisposition toward data.
But
Okay.
I'm not good at it. But I'm
So
not that good at it. A simple data, I'm the best. Like you can't touch me. Like simple math, 1 + 1, I know it's 2, and you can't get there faster than me. But when you start layering it in and you get into different sums and they drive different field, I get lost fast. I have to have a really smart ops partner that drills through that with me, which without tools and the ability to do that with the way that we're doing that today versus when I was originally a leader in the 2000s, you can do things in a matter of hours. You can self-serve to get to information in ways that we never could before. And I would have to sit there with an ops partner who then would have to go off for days, weeks at a time
yeah,
to help build out those models so we could try to figure out what was the most effective and efficient way that we could grow the company as fast but responsibly as possible.
I want to talk about this partnership between you as a revenue leader and then the operations teams you have. But before we do that, a lot of revenue leaders out there, Adam, they're intimidated by data. They don't have the literacy, they don't have the DNA, they haven't seen the value of jumping into the science, so they hyper focus on the art of sales. What would you say to revenue leaders out there to encourage them to develop this literacy or at least to dive into the data?
Yeah, you're infinitely unscalable. It's a great conversation to have because I use data as a way to keep me honest and to keep me on track. When it comes down to whether I'm going to get a deal or not, my gut sings to me at those moments. But I can be much more scalable and effective when I know where to focus those moments. And I do that by being able to read the tea leaves through the data. And I have to be intimate enough with it to know it and have a partner on the operations side that I can articulate that with
Mhm.
so that we can make the best decisions possible. And that's not just for me as a leader, that's for the greater leaders in the organization and that are on my team and where we spend time as a unit.
So that's my next question is you've obviously been frontline leader, but you've been second, third, fourth line as well. When you're in that more senior position, how do you go about making sure that your whole leadership team has the same literacy, the same reliance, the same action from data that you would if you were in their shoes.
Yeah, well, we build standards around it so that we can all agree on what those standards are that we're going to adhere to. Because the interesting thing about data, there's a lot of it. So organizing it and agreeing on what are the things that are core, what are the core OKRs and KPIs that we want to agree to that we're going to look at on a daily, weekly basis. And then frankly, we get together and we talk about it. We go through the data together, but using solutions that enable us to do that because we're so remote, things are so virtual. We have to be able to self-serve, and the tool sets like Clary that we're able to use give us the ability to do that. But frankly, it's the collaboration that you get that really bodes the biggest for me, is the ability to then, be able to self-serve and drive collaboration through that so that we iteratively get better as a group.
It's super interesting. I'm curious to hear more about that cadence that you mentioned. You have things you're doing daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Any particular nuggets you'd recommend for people if they're trying to get more of a cadence motion across their revenue process? Do you feel like there are any moments throughout the quarter where you're like, man, we really struck gold by implementing this process or agreeing to this standardization for how to approach our revenue process?
What's most key and important to me is that you've got a sales process that you adhere to that everyone agrees they're going to follow. And that you have qualifiers that live within that process that the team buys into, that you're using and you're adhering to, you're holding yourselves accountable to. If you can build that into Salesforce, you can then build productivity models that you can adhere to because you have standards that you can base those productivity models off of that everybody's following. And then if you want to change one, you can see how that change is going to drive different productivity measures. The issue with Salesforce, its reporting is quite limited, and its ability to give you visibility
Yep.
and act on things is a challenge. You talk about 10 years ago, I would spend my evenings in Salesforce filling out data for other people that would give them value to understand what I was doing. It had very little value to me. It didn't allow me to do things in real time, where there are much better ways to do that today. And that's why there are solutions that exist that give you the capability, because otherwise I'm missing dinner with my wife and kids, right? So I'm sitting between 6 and 7, and rather than having dinner with them, I got to get these administrative tasks done. And that just doesn't, that helps everybody except for the sellers,
And
and everybody except for the leaders.
it's interesting too, Adam, because I know a lot of individual reps. Certainly, when I was an individual rep, I felt the same way, which is, do I have to follow this methodology? Do I have to follow this process? Do I have to put this information in the CRM? And your point is standardization allows for scale. And there are some things that you've got to do as a seller to keep everybody else aware of the things that are happening so that they can help you. So how do you overcome that balance? Because what I see is, yeah, there's always the one person who doesn't abide by the process and goes to President's Club. But then there's the other 50% of people who don't follow the process and fail miserably. So how do you find that right balance of creating a process that is helpful to reps without overburdening them with a bunch of administrative things?
Yeah, I try to make it so that I live in their shoes, because as a seller, I want to be able to be empathetic to if they're going to come to me and say, this just isn't fair what you're asking me to do. And then at the same time, I have to look at what's best for the organization. And I think that that's a fine line to walk when you're a leader, because we need the information. So you need better tools in order to input the information, and you need better ways to articulate that than just using Salesforce by itself. Or we would just use Salesforce by itself, but it's a labor to do it without modern tool sets that can give you the access and abilities that give me the sense of which sellers are following the process and which ones aren't. And if you've earned the right to be able to go do things a little bit differently, you'll find that those folks are still doing things within the process
Yeah.
buckets. They just can't articulate it that way. But if you can look at the way that they're doing what they're doing, and look at the trends and the way that they manage their business and their productivity rates and their close rates and the amount of time that they spend in the different parts of the sales process, once you have those standards laid out and agreed to, you'll find that those people are managing themselves very well. And there's eagles, right? They can't describe. I have a leader that works for me that says why eagles land on the top of a tree,
What?
because that's where they aim, right? They can't tell you why, but they do. And
Huh.
you want to give eagles the opportunity to fly. At the same time, we all have to adhere to the same standards, and they have to be willing to understand that what they're doing, it falls within the standards. Otherwise, like, what are we asking everyone to do? But you'll find the people that aren't following it, when you dig in and you look at the data and you look at their productivity rates and how much they bring into the pipeline versus what closes, they're not doing the right things. They're not spending time. They get stuck in places where you can say, hey, that's an opportunity for us to go help this person and unwind that and get them up and above over quota, or it's an opportunity for them to move on and potentially they can't do this here and they need to go do something else.
That makes sense. Now, I want to revisit something you said earlier. So you mentioned good data can lead to good decisions, and bad data can lead to bad decisions. I'm curious to pull this thread where you got some bad data and you made a decision that maybe wasn't optimal for the business. Any scenario like that come to mind where you're like, shoot, man, I wish we hadn't done that, and here's how I'm avoiding it moving forward?
Before I could look and inspect the data myself, I'd rely on others to give it to me. And if I
Mm,
get data from someone, data is a powerful thing, right? So they can give you a subset of the data, they can give you a full view of the data. And I've been given data that wasn't the full view before and said, hey, why would you? And then understanding that it's a self serving need of, or a reason why they did it that wasn't fully transparent. And that stuff would really get my goat. And what the interesting thing though is when you, if you make a bad decision, and you will, based on whether it's good data, frankly, like also, I've been moving so fast that I've looked at data and I haven't given it the right amount of thought. And I've just said, hey, let's go do that. And it's the wrong decision. And so taking the time, like you can move too quickly and you can trip. So taking the time to really make sure that you're making good driven decisions is important, but you're going to move quickly and you're going to break something once in a while. And if you do, the nice thing is if you got good information, you can see it, you'll see it quickly and you can make a proactive decision about it versus, hey, this is going on. And in the startup world, things move really fast. Weeks are months and months are years. So it's like, you got to see it and move before it happens. And that's like, you have weeks to make decisions.
Speaking of the startup world, you moved, I believe you joined Okta in late 2012. And if I got this right, I think when you joined, they were about a million or so in revenue. And over
Yeah.
your 6 years, you grew that to about 300 million in
As
revenue.
in bookings, not in rev. That's in bookings. So revenue is a lagging indicator
Okay.
of bookings. I could never tell what the revenue number actually was. Those finance guys are really good. We did a lot of bookings and we were really proud of our growth and the things that we were able to accomplish and Okta continues to accomplish.
Yeah, it's an incredible company, and folks there, the revenue leadership, the executive leadership is just world class. But I'm curious to go back maybe to the 2012, 2013 range. The economy is just coming out of the recession. Okta gets this $25 million round. What were the expectations that you were feeling at the time? New sales leader, new organization, flush with cash, high aspirations. What was going on in your mind at
I had just come out of BMC software and I wanted to go do something that I thought could be a game changer for my customers and the people I was working with. And I hated passwords. So I just hated, I hated identity management. I didn't understand why I had to go through a VPN in order to get to salesforce.com. I was like, just doesn't make sense. And I'm logging in twice and there's got to be a better way. And I met Todd McKinnon and the team and I had made a decision to go do a startup and the CEO of Blade Logic had gone and joined Greylock. And I knew Ben Horowitz through Mark Creaney at Andreessen, and they were both early investors in Okta. And when I was leaving BMC, I went to them and said, hey, can you show me some portfolio companies? I want to go do a startup. And they both pointed me to Okta very early on in that search. And it took me a while to go do it. So I did a bunch of diligence on the opportunity before I joined. I brought in one of my mentors during my interview process. It took me like 3 months to make the decision because I really vetted it because I'm like, this looks like a great opportunity, but I want to make sure that I'm making the right one because it's a big risk for me. And it was a great risk and it was a calculated one. And, with Todd McKinnon and the vision that he had and whether, throughout that process from when we were very early on and through today, he's held true to it. And that's been a great opportunity that I was able to be a part of.
And I know you well enough to know that this journey from a million to 300 million in bookings, you're going to say it was team effort. There were a million different players that played a role. And so now let's transition to talking about who were your core partners there. You've mentioned the partnership you've had with operations over the years. Tell us about it. What was that like on that journey to 300x growth?
Jake Randall started as an operations director when I was like maybe 3 months before I was hired at Okta. And he was young. He had maybe like one tour of duty before that. And he wanted to go get his MBA. And Frederick Karras, the COO, told him, "Hey, come here and work for a year and I'll help you get into Stanford to get your MBA." And so Jake, that was originally his plan. And I think he left Okta 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, and he's
Yeah.
now the COO at Common Room. But Jake's one of the best operators. Like I learned so much working with him, and I have such a great respect for him because we learned together, right? And so he's a big early Clary adopter. Like he came to me and said, "Hey, you have to look at this tool." And I love the idea. Now, Clary's gone through a maturity process as well, because when we started with Clary, it was very early days and the products matured quite a bit over that period of time. But I had a really healthy respect for Jake. And when he brought it in and we were looking at all the different analytics and the predictive modeling that we could do, and then the ease of use for sales reps that were mobile and on the fly and being able to get data into the system and lowering the time costs that sales would need to do at the end of the day because we were able to do it in real time, just made a ton of sense. But what really drove it for me was the accountability that we could drive in forecasting with Clary that we just couldn't drive in Salesforce. We would have to do it in Excel. We were doing it on paper and then driving it in an Excel spreadsheet. And we were able to pull it all together under one umbrella. And you can do it at scale. Like we were able to do it. And you mentioned like second, third, fourth line. And the design and build of that became really core to from the way that we looked at deals to the way that we looked at customers to the way that we ran our business. It was just became a really integral part.
This partnership that you had with Jake, was he head of revenue operations? What was his title at the time?
Jake was like the jack. He ran revenue ops, legal. Like he was the jack of all trades in the early days. And then he ran revenue operations in the later years. After that, Jake went out and became a sales leader and ran a territory and then as a VP. And then he went back to Okta.
That's right.
And ran like strategy operations before he left to go to Common Room as the chief operating officer. He's a really great human.
So you two are working together to build this process, and you're leaning on technology or leaning on data when you can. Ultimately, it's, as you mentioned before, it's a human-led business. It's people buy from people. And so the partnership that you two have building this process, why did it matter so much to you to have the predictability, to have a forecast that you can trust? What are the implications of trusting that output of the process?
So I used to have a boss that would say, "You can miss by $1 and it feels like the whole world just crumbled under your feet, or you can make it by $1 and it feels like the greatest day. You know, it's your birthday, Christmas, and New Year's all lined up at one time." So we have two jobs as sales leaders. We have to deliver a number and we have to do it in a period of time. And if we can do those two things, there's two dials. It's like I got volume and time. And if I can set those up properly and build a business, it's all about risk management. And it's all about being able to say that, hey, we can get $1 over the number or $10, but we cannot miss by $1. And so that miss is so important to the morale and the culture of an organization. And that's built on good data. I've been in organizations where I've come in and said, "Hey, help me understand what the quota is per rep, and then help me understand what the total quota is by the team." And I run the numbers and go, "How did you get here?" And they go, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Your average deal size times the number of deals that we're doing on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis don't add up to the quota that you set for yourself. We were told we had to take on more this year." And I'm like, "And you just crushed the company. Like what you did was totally against the rules of what you should be doing as a competent leader to drive the quotas of this organization. This isn't rocket science. This is Lego blocks. Like this is data built on top of data on top of data. And you should be able to peel it back and look at it and understand it and drive different results out of it." And that's really the core of what, as a leader and being able to use data for good and be able to drive things like quotas and productivity plan. Like, I'll say if you have bad data and you make bad decisions, people like you kill sales reps.
Yeah.
And then inevitably you kill yourself. So it's like those decisions are so built on good data. Like we raise our quotas every year. How do we do that? Well, I look at what the productive headcount did last year. I play that against what our average deal sizes are doing. Are they trending up? What are our win rates looking like? I can't do that without the reporting and solution sets that I get out of my CRM system.
It's exactly right. And it's the timing for that commentary, Adam, is so appropriate because we're in this time now as a SaaS industry where we're going from growth at all costs and throw more bodies at the problem and don't worry about how much you're spending to now this age of austerity where the growth has to be done responsibly. It has to be done with the data, with the evidence. You can't just spend hundreds of millions of dollars to accomplish a goal and burn cash at insane rates anymore. And so this mindset that you have, it has to become the popular mindset for revenue leaders. Otherwise, to your point, they're not going to have jobs for too much longer.
I don't know how you could do it another way. Like you say, like this, they spend at all costs and throw body. It just sounds irresponsible, sloppy, and bad.
Yeah, it's just
So
lazy.
I think, yeah, it's just, yeah, it's lazy or it's, I don't know what, I have a worse term for it, but I can't probably say it. Yeah, it just isn't, it wouldn't be the right thing to do. And look, we're in these roles, these are hard jobs, like no matter what. You should have a lot of pride and you should try to be the very best at what you do. If
Yes,
there's one mission statement that I have as a sales leader, I want to have the best software team in any industry, anywhere. I want people to look at that and say, those folks are the best at what they do because what we do is really hard. And our ability to do it at the very best should be what we aspire to do. We're professionals. We should want
exactly.
to be the very best at what we do. And you do that by making good decisions. You can't do that without good data.
It, this term that you're using is such an important one, Adam. Becoming a revenue professional. A lot of sellers will focus on the sales competencies and they'll read the books and they'll focus on the negotiation skills and all those sorts of things. And yes, those are important too. But it's a lot about how you think about yourself, the data that you have, the way that you show up professionally across all settings. So I'm really happy to hear that you have that focus and those are the mindsets, the behaviors, the actions that you're driving across your team. I want to go back again to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned that having an operational partner that you can trust, you said they keep you honest. I'm curious to hear about a time you and your operator, Jake, you maybe didn't agree on something, or maybe you had a certain perspective on something and Jake set you straight.
Yeah. So what I would find is if he get really amped up or bent about something, it was usually something I should pay attention to because whether, I agreed with him or not, it was worth listening to. And
Hmm.
where Jake was originally a finance guy, he came at us through the finance organization. And I think he has a healthier respect for being an operator now through the experiences that we had. Where on in the early days, it was more of a numbers game. And how do you drive those numbers? And it's not always the numbers. It's the people that drive those numbers and understanding the habits that they have and how those habits drive different results. And we both, I think, got a really healthy respect for that over time. And when he would say, "Hey, Adam, we need to raise quota," and it would become like, depending on how much money we would be able to raise quotas, gives the other departments the ability to spend more. And so there comes a point where there's, "Hey, we just need you to add like an extra 3 million in quota." And you just say, "No." And it's, "Why not?" It's because you're going to break the model and you know it. And so let's go back through it and let's go test it. And let's go see if you really think we can add, because let's add it up. Like we would have to go hire those people right now in order for them to be productive enough. And by the way, it's not 3 people, it's probably 5 people in order to hit the productivity metrics that we need. How do we train them, enable them? Do we have enough pipeline to bring them on right now? And you'd go look at the data and we'd sit back down and you'd be like, "No, but you have to go talk to the CFO and tell him that because he's beating on me." That after we would have these conversations year over year, he'd be like, "Okay, dude, you two we just need to get you guys in a room and have this conversation," because he understood that like there comes a point where you could say, "Hey, let's amp this thing up and let's crank it. My amp goes to 11, but you're going to break it." And that takes a level of partnership and cross functional good work together to get there.
So you've seen revenue orgs operate at scale. You've seen revenue orgs operate at Series C companies. You find yourself now back at Drata, raised a $200 million round in December. Congratulations. And you're building another revenue machine. What's top of mind for you? What's first on your priority list?
Oh, dude, there's so much opportunity at Drata. It's a really great problem statement. We're fortunate that there's really good product market fit. This is an area where there's a lot of pain up and down with what we do at Drata is we automate the data collection and attestation for compliance and security risk. And that is a painful process today. In order to get things like your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or your FedRAMP. There's a lot of manual data collection without a tool like Drata. And so every company in the world has these problems, and nobody's really conquered that automation opportunity for the CISOs and for IT. And if you ask them, they'll tell you it's miserable today. And there's a better mousetrap, and that's what makes it really interesting. But it's early days. Drata's only 24 months old as a company, actually 25 as of today. January 15th was our 2-year anniversary. So we're 25 months old today. And with that, the company's grown at an alarming pace and has a huge opportunity to grow in front of it. So putting things in place like standards and processes that we can all agree to, and qualifiers, and how we generate value with our solution for our customers so we can articulate that and allow them to build criteria around that are things that we're really starting to figure out right now and build into our cadence. And then being able to look at where we've come from so that we can make really good decisions on where we're going. And as we go, be able to iterate and say, hey, we want to take bigger bets over here and maybe move some chips around the table, are things that we're just constantly working on in this environment. And that stuff's fun. That's something, going out and people a way to do things that they've never been able to do it before, and just makes their lives better. That stuff's fun.
I love that. And what I really appreciate about your approach, Adam, is you're a meat and potatoes guy. Like, you have the operational rigor, you have the standards, you have the process, and it's all about getting, not to say the basics, right, but the fundamental parts that
That's
allow
it,
you
yeah.
to scale.
I'm not that bright, dude. I'm not the rocket scientist. And you'd have someone else on this in the studio with you if you wanted to do in this podcast. I like to apply standards. I like to keep it simple. I do it because it makes me a better seller. I found as an individual, I could navigate without needing tools to do it, but I couldn't articulate what I was doing without this process and standards. I would be trying to explain what I was doing, and I just couldn't get my sales manager, and I wouldn't gel. I couldn't get my point across. And then when I realized, once I got to learn the vernacular and the standards and the way that people wanted me to articulate what I was doing, I had the freedom to go do it. And they would follow with me and help me and give me more access to do things better. And then the team got better, and the companies I was working for got better. And that all has a snowball effect. And so even as an individual contributor, you can be a leader, and you can really help companies drive the way that they're doing things. And I always enjoyed that.
It's fantastic advice. And that virtuous cycle that ends up getting created when you're doing things the right way and you're over communicating, you're bringing people along. It's just beautiful. So this has been a masterclass in how to think about revenue, how to think about operations, all the data points in between. Any closing thoughts, Adam, that you'd want the audience to know?
Yeah, look, what I'll say is there are people that try to keep information, and because information is powerful, and it's wrong. So if you want to build a great organization and you want to build trust, and not just with your customers, because I think in the same way that you'd hide information internally, you would from your customers, having a culture of transparency and starting with data and making sure that everyone has the access and ability to see it, to make good decisions. You need the tools to do that is really important, and builds a culture of success, and one that you can change the world with. And so I think that's what it really gets me juiced about the opportunity of working with companies like Clary, and with companies like building companies like Drata around the ability to do things like that.
Adam Aarons, CRO at Drata, thank you so much for the time. This was amazing.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Adam said it best. Good data is really good. Bad data is really bad. Creating a trusting partnership around tools and processes with your RevOps team is critical to your success. Thanks again to Adam Aarons, CRO at Drata, for the insights. If you like what you heard, be sure to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next time with more tips to stop revenue leak and get you running revenue like a pro.